What matters in photography is also what matters in life itself. Focus. When taking a photograph, the question arises, how do you marry form and subject matter? What do I make of reality by means of my vision, my focus? Take the golden mean, for instance, or any other law of photography. These laws exist, whether you are aware of them or not. There's the law of the diagonal, 2 to 5. This line ought to be up here. A bit ought to be taken away here too. It would be better if this shadow were on the diagonal. This part is completely unnecessary. It would look better if we cut off this part. Still, I don't think it's anything special. The man's lopsided. That doesn't give the picture much effect. The photographer just didn't have the right feel for focus. You need to develop sensitivity for that.
Es ist eine Sensibilität, die entwickelt man bei sich selbst.
Walter FRENTZ is still on the move, travelling around, presenting his own pictures. Diary entry, January the 19th. Pack whitewater trip through the Black Mountains, the kayaking film for Nuremberg. Appointment, January the 20th. Slide talk, the other Germany. City Hall, Heilbronn, 8 p.m. Relabel slides of Berlin. Check train connections for minimum waiting. Keep the wheels moving, or you'll rust. Note in Walter FRENTZ's film diary, Berlin, January the 22nd, 1941. Excerpts from my Bismarck film for Berlin, Rome, Tokyo. 2:30 p.m. Showing of Gone with the Wind at the Propaganda Ministry. I arrived late. The Führer said to Dr. Goebbels, "FRENTZ is our Flying Dutchman. He's everywhere and nowhere." Walter FRENTZ, born 1907. Electrical engineer, cameraman and canoeist. Chief cameraman for Leni Riefenstahl and personal cameraman to Adolf Hitler. Today, his visiting card describes him as adult education tutor, freelance and filmmaker. Friday, February the 12th. To Berlin on the Führer's special train. Saw Walt Disney's Snow White with him yet again. Then on to the Führer's Wolfschanze headquarters. At the exhibition of wall paintings, the Führer said to me, "Your colored photographs may be able to capture moments or details very well, but only a painter can give an overall picture of the event or the experience." I don't agree. February the 12th, 11 p.m. At the Führer's Wolfschanze headquarters, showed him my film Whitewater Trip Through the Black Mountains. The Führer said to me, "FRENTZ, we've now got so much blue skies over our new territories in the east and the south that we no longer need a Davos or a Samaritz, and Russia will be our India." Half a century later, 8 p.m. Film by kayaking pioneer Walter FRENTZ in the clubroom of the Nuremberg Kayaking Club, once the basement of Hitler's Congress building. Tonight, Walter FRENTZ, one of our greatest kayaking pioneers, made famous through expeditions to foreign countries and cultures and through his sports films about pioneer kayaking trips. He will show his debut film, Whitewater Trip Through the Black Mountains, personally. Walter FRENTZ showed this first film to Joe Pasternak of Universal Studios in Berlin in 1932. Pasternak was so enthusiastic about the mobile camera work and the classic composition of the pictures that he bought the film at once and used it as the supporting program to Robert Flaherty's Nanook of the North. This was the beginning of a meteoric career that would last for the next 12 years. 1 year later, in 1933, FRENTZ became the eye of the Third Reich. His new moving camera technique ideally suited the needs of the new regime to represent itself in unstoppable movement.
Licht aus.
Lights out.
Pantarai was the motto of the whitewater canoeist. Everything flows. Life is a river, Walter FRENTZ noted in his new logbook of 1933. Leni Riefenstahl found in Walter FRENTZ the ideal cameraman to document the staging of the Nazi Party rally of 1934. She told FRENTZ that she wanted to make an artistic film about the National Socialist movement, a triumph of the will. She promised him an altogether smoother ride than he had had in the paddle boat.
Eines Tages wurde ja dann von Leni Riefenstahl.
One day I heard that Leni Riefenstahl had been commissioned to film the Nazi Party rally. She had got to know Albert Speer, who was a member of our kayaking club. He was still an architecture student under Professor Tessender. Leni Riefenstahl asked him quite naively, Herr Speer, I'm going to make a film in Nuremberg. Do you know of a good cameraman? And Speer answered in his Heidelberg dialect, I only know one, Walter FRENTZ. He's just made a good paddle boat film. You can ask him.
Ich hätte sie ja mal fragen. Und da rief sie mich an.
She called me up. I've heard you are a good cameraman. I only knew her as an actress in The Blue Light. I had been very impressed by The Blue Light. We were both of the opinion that film was like a musical score in which the camera was the principal soloist.
Eine Partitur ist, bei der die Kamera Primat haben muss.
In Triumph of the Will, Walter FRENTZ employed the same methods of shooting as in his kayaking films. In Hitler's Mercedes, he had the perfect counterpart to the moving kayak. Waves breaking on riverbanks are now the waves of human arms rising in loyal salute. FRENTZ simply cut out everything that detracted from a hero that carried all before him. Every movement converges obediently on the eye. We see what Hitler sees. We identify. The will is triumphant. FRENTZ has done his job well. Film diary, note from September the 8th, 1934. Forced the river of life into film cassettes. Rode in car through Nuremberg with the Führer. The same problems as in the kayak. Light changes too great. Need new filters. In 1934, FRENTZ suggested to Hitler's architect, Albert Speer, that he should create an architectural illusion out of light, a dome of light above the site of the Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg. Speer was enthusiastic and had 130 anti-aircraft searchlights set up. Their beams, with a range of 4 miles, cut into the night sky. British Ambassador Henderson described it at the time as a cathedral of ice. Today, only the stone ruins remain.
Ja, sehr fremd. Nichts wiederzuerkennen.
It's bizarre. I recognize nothing.
Eine Zerstörung.
So much destruction.
Einstiger Baukunst.
Once there were lovely, huge buildings with beautiful interior decoration. Times do change.
Die Zeiten ändern sich.
In Nuremberg, Walter FRENTZ found more ways to free the camera. To get vertical traveling shots, he suggested to Leni Riefenstahl that a lift be installed in one of the gigantic flagpoles above the speaker's podium. FRENTZ transformed 250,000 people into a gigantic ornament. Faces were no longer recognizable. Individuals disappeared into the mass. The correspondent from the New York Times wrote of 25,000 flags, a surging sea of red, indescribably beautiful, giving the impression of a huge flower bed. And yet, it was no more than a choreography of the masses, marching towards a dark future, keeping step in a dance of death. Walter FRENTZ grew to believe in his own pictures as accurate representations of events. So it was no surprise when the propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels chose FRENTZ to take Leni Riefenstahl's place. It was now official. The congenial FRENTZ would make National Socialism aesthetic. For Labor Day in 1935, he was commissioned to make Hands at Work, a film to glorify the German worker. The huge new airship was a potent symbol of the power of the new technology and of the new relationships being forged between men and machines. Giant machines and the ordinary workers who operate them are caught admiringly in FRENTZ's camera.
Reichspropagandaleitung hat mich ausgesucht.
The Reichspropaganda head office had sought me out and offered me the chance to make a film about Labor Day. I asked them if I could choose my own crew. They said, no, you have to use our out-of-work cameraman. I asked, do they know how to film documentaries? They were upset. Listen, young man, they said, you have no experience. Our people have been in the business for a long time. I said, but I have some very special ideas for this film. Okay, I had to say yes if I was going to get any work at all. And so I explained to the old cameraman what my concept for this film was. They just laughed at me. Listen, don't tell us. We know how to shoot films. When the material was developed, it turned out that they had all produced similar pictures. Workers marching from the north of Berlin, from the west, from the east, from the south, and always the same thing.
Der eine hat es im Norden von Berlin, der andere im Westen, der andere im Osten, aber im Grunde war alles dasselbe.
There were no close-ups, although I had specifically asked for them. After I had looked to the material in its entirety, I went to the Reichspropaganda head office and informed them that I wasn't able to make a film with this material. I could think of only one solution. We would take the Führer's Labor Day speech and use it as the climax for a completely new film that I would still have to make. A cross-section of the world of work. When the film was screened at the University of Göttingen after the war, one of the students asked me, were you allowed to employ Walter Gronostai, who was a communist? I said, only I knew he was, the others didn't. The music was the important thing and not the communism. I very much admired the work of Eisenstein and other Russians, and perhaps it was an indirect attempt to try something like this in the German context. As I always say in film, image is paramount.
The workers work in synchrony and harmony. Production is now a poem. The struggles of the past are over. Workers are proud. There was only one flaw in this film. No pictures of Hitler until the very end. Hands at Work won several international prizes, but in Germany it disappeared into the archives, as Goebbels found it of little use for propaganda purposes. However, Frentz's talents were still in demand.
Ja, die sind 9-12 die
The 9x12 slides.
Wir haben auch auf unseren
We were already taking 9x12 slides on our kayaking trips.
Da ist zum Beispiel
Here, for
eins
instance,
von Jugoslawien
in Yugoslavia on the River Drina.
auf der Drina. Mal sehen, was wir
Let's
noch
see what
haben.
else we have.
Und hier habe
Ah,
ich was
that
von der Olympiade
36 Olympics.
mit Leni
That's me with
Riefenstahl.
Leni Riefenstahl and my assistant, who's driving us on the dolly.
Auf dem
The
Kamerawagen
Olympic
fährt.
Stadium in Berlin.
Das ist
We were taking a traveling shot.
Fahraufnahme.
Movement is the
Bewegung
genius of
heißt
life.
des Lebens Genius, Bewegung. Das ist schön.
In 1936, Leni Riefenstahl made Walter FRENTZ her head cameraman for her Olympic Games. Note in Frentz's film diary: pole vault. Use good cheering spectator shots from other events. Set up audience for enthusiastic applause shots. Prepare marathon. Film diary, September the 15th, 1936. Try out Sinclair camera beforehand. Runner's shadows. Close-up of arm and leg. Ride ahead in lorry during training. Turned camera upside down. Developed wire basket for camera which the runner activates himself. Change picture frequency to simulate runner tiring. At the age of 85, Walter FRENTZ traveled to Berlin for a film about Leni Riefenstahl. But this time, he would be in front of the camera. He had been invited to talk about old times with old friends.
sei umschlungen auch ohne Millionen, diesen Kuss nur dir allein.
My two best cameramen together here after half a century. Wonderful. Yes, we've got a lot to thank you for. What would life be without Leni?
Old comrades together again. They remembered what they had agreed to remember. The dark side of their memories they kept to themselves. FRENTZ saw in Hitler the artist, politician, and the actor. He believed less in the actual person Adolf Hitler than in the picture he had created of him. Perhaps Hitler too believed increasingly in the image which his cameraman had constructed, even when his charisma began to dissolve after the military defeats of 1943. The beginning, though, had seen victory after victory, and FRENTZ was promoted to first lieutenant. He chose a new arm of the service, the Luftwaffe. They have the nicest uniforms, and you can float high above everything. A poet obeys no commands, he wrote in his film diary in the second year of the war. In 1940, his name was already in the telephone directory of the German newsreel, under miscellaneous. Between the entries for airport and television station, it read, FRENTZ, Walter, personal cameraman to the Führer, Berlin 991456. He had become an institution. Walter FRENTZ all too often got bored in the Führer's headquarters. Even the many trips he made as Hitler's eye could not compensate for his desire to see the real action at the front. In August 1941, when Himmler invited him to fly with him to the Russian front at Minsk, he gratefully accepted. In Minsk, FRENTZ's illusion of his own independence was to be destroyed, and there he also finally stepped over the threshold of guilt. Until then, Himmler had tried in vain to win FRENTZ for his SS brotherhood, as he needed a contact in Hitler's inner circle. Initially, FRENTZ filmed a trip to the country, which seemed quite harmless to him. A trip to nowhere in particular with the Reichsführer SS. While FRENTZ was glad to have escaped Hitler's monologues, vegetarian recipes, and nighttime tea sessions accompanied by films of operettas, Himmler was planning Walter FRENTZ's initiation into the SS. He was going to make FRENTZ witness to the execution of a group of Ukrainian Jews. First, there was a sightseeing tour of Minsk, followed by a visit to a prison camp. FRENTZ noticed that Himmler often checked to see whether the camera was running. He also touched his nose several times to signal, "I don't want this shot," and waited until Hitler's cameraman had changed position. FRENTZ began to realize that he was to serve a new master. Suddenly, lorries carrying Russian peasants drove up. They were made to lie down in dugout pits, and the SS fired until nothing moved. FRENTZ took photographs of the execution. He intended to use them later as proof of a war crime. When FRENTZ later showed the pictures of the execution to General Jodl at the Führer's headquarters and asked him what he should think about it, Jodl said, "FRENTZ, keep quiet about it." FRENTZ kept quiet and wiped the incident from his memory. Film diary, August 15, 1941. 10 a.m., prison camp. 11 a.m. to 12 a.m., execution. 1 p.m., lunch at Lenin's house. 3 p.m., lunatic asylum. 6 p.m., the Reichsführer SS took 2 Russian boys with him to Berlin. The compromising notes and photographs were probably part of an exchange deal between the pederast Himmler and FRENTZ. FRENTZ's photographs put him in a position to decline Himmler's request to make a propaganda film about the Theresienstadt concentration camp, a camp built for press presentation purposes only. Film diary, August 16. Took pictures of Kolchos boys undressing with the Reichsführer SS watching. 1 strip of film is missing. Most probably FRENTZ bought his freedom with it. He was again the Führer's personal cameraman, undividedly. A few months later, Himmler threatened him with the testimony of SS squad leader Wolf, who would confirm that on August the 15th in Minsk, Wolf had admitted FRENTZ into the SS as Untersturmführer. This threat probably resulted in a final handing over of the compromising pictures. Film diary, December 1941. Refused to do the Theresienstadt film. I'm indispensable. I am not going to promote lies. Note in diary on December the 21st, 1941. The Reichsführer SS has promised me a Yangtze kayak film expedition after the war. A kayaking trip in a China defeated by Japan. A long-cherished dream of the canoeist. On the Obersalzberg, Hitler's private refuge, FRENTZ looks for his old quarters on the bird's-eye view model.
Hier steht Kindergarten.
That's where I lived. In the kindergarten building. That's all in the past now.
Das ist alles Vergangenheit.
Although Walter FRENTZ was aware of what was really going on in the Third Reich, he continued to make films which painted pretty pictures. A trip with Goering through a Ukrainian village turned into a lie. It was becoming increasingly difficult to create idols. People put on smiles only when ordered to. But the Potemkin villagers on celluloid met with official approval. FRENTZ also soothed his own doubts with these lyrical confections. When a soldier in one of the SS firing squads in a neighboring village begged FRENTZ to get him out of there, as he couldn't stand it any longer, the cameraman replied, "I can't help you. I belong to the Luftwaffe, and I don't have any power here." FRENTZ banished any room for doubt by being almost manically on the move, and he still does this today. Then Hitler called him our Flying Dutchman, after the character in Wagner's romantic opera, the legendary figure of a heartless seafarer, condemned to travel forever on a haunted ship, whose ghostly appearance is a harbinger of doom to seamen. He's everywhere and nowhere, Hitler complained to Goebbels, his propaganda minister. FRENTZ noted this in his film diary under comments. Hitler had his army conquer Europe and had his cameraman report events to him in perfectly composed pictures during nighttime tea sessions in his headquarters. Film diary. Born to see, summoned to look, sworn to the camera, the world is mine. With the end of the Blitzkrieg and the beginning of the siege of Stalingrad, visits made by public figures to the Reich became shorter and less frequent. FRENTZ found that he didn't have enough to do, so he set up a portrait studio to photograph the visitors. Boris, King of Bulgaria, ordered 24 copies of himself.
Many people have accused me, and rightly so, of depicting a man like that far too positively in my films. They asked me why I didn't make bad films about him. After all, those good pictures were good publicity for him. It was my profession. I can't make bad films.
Ja, für mich war das Beruf. Ich kann keine schlechten machen.
Hitler said, "FRENTZ, you're one of us." And Hitler's mistress, Eva Braun, invites the cameraman to her private apartment at Wasserburgstrasse number 12 in Munich. However, her sister, Franziska Braun, finds the man who was dressed in Bavarian costume and accompanied by a Japanese woman too reserved and not particularly entertaining. But Eva carried on shooting pictures.
Naja, ich habe sehr nette...
I had some pleasant conversations with Eva Braun. One day, being deliberately provocative, I said, "Fräulein Braun, you are the most invaluable woman in Germany." Of course, many of us wondered why Hitler was with her. She wasn't anything special, really.
Hitler mit ihr so befreundet, was ist der Grund? Die ist doch gar nicht so was Besonderes.
Eva Braun replied, "Oh, her friends, I'm only a bird in a gilded cage."
Ich bin nur in einem goldenen Käfig.
Hitler's mistress shared Walter Frentz's passion for the camera and its principal subject. Hitler's photographer Hoffmann had suggested that Frentz should become the founding director of a new film academy. Frentz declined politely after the war. From time to time, he gave Eva Braun advice on filmmaking and camera work. Both were enthusiastic about the new Agfa color films. Only Hitler was critical. Color should be reserved for painters.
Das ist alles Vergangenheit.
That's all in the past. Don't always talk about the past. Live in the present and be concerned for a more humane future.
Eine menschlichere Zukunft.
Walter Frentz has arrived at his birthplace, Heilbronn, to give a talk and show slides on Eastern Germany. The Heilbronn Choral Society welcomes him with the song, "O wie schön ist deine Welt, your world is so beautiful." But they know nothing of his past.
I'm pleased that tonight I'm able to give one of my lectures in Heilbronn, the town where I was born. After the Second World War, I couldn't make any films, but I had saved about 5,000 color slides, mostly photographs of nature.
His lectures were sold out as early as 1946. He had 5,000 color slides still in his possession. Having lost the war, audiences wanted to see a Germany unmarked by history, still intact and in color.
Our journey begins in Berlin and will also end in Berlin.
In 1929, Frentz had given his very first lecture with slides in Berlin. Kayaking expeditions in black and white. 10 years later, in 1939, Hitler became his new audience. Frentz became the Führer's third eye, surveying the outside world for him. Every one of Frentz's pictures was made according to the classic laws of composition. Albert Speer collected them together with Adolf Hitler's architectural sketches. And Frentz always carried an order list for the many people who wanted copies. Frentz's private photographs of Hitler show a dictator planning to rebuild German towns on a gigantic scale, higher, longer, and wider than Paris, London, and New York. At the exhibitions of New German art, Hitler spoke to Frentz of his fascination with the intimate relationship between beauty and violence. The point of the war came with Stalingrad. Hitler now turned his attention to his secret weapons and sent his third eye to the testing sites at Peenemünde and Rechlin. As the Reich began to crumble, Hitler tried to hide the physical signs of Parkinson's disease, the trembling of his left hand and the paralysis in his face. His cameraman saw nothing more than a frozen smile and continued to deliver pretty pictures to cheer the people up. In 1945, he wrote in his diary, "A poet obeys no commands."
Also 45, gell?
For a short time, Walter FRENTZ is at home, taking a rest from his travels in his cave of pictures. From 1943 onward, he says, he took photographs in color. In the spring of 45, Hitler took cover in his Berlin bomb shelter while the German people waited for the wonder weapon. FRENTZ was in Venice and ordered his bags to be packed for a final journey to Berlin. It led him through the ruined towns of the fatherland. His typical attention to form is missing in his last pictures. The propaganda ministry in Berlin was in ruins, and the Reich Chancellery was a heap of rubble. But their basements were still intact, and in them lay stolen pictures from all over Europe.
That was Wildenstein Castle. In the last days of the war, I hid art treasures there which had previously been stored in the Reich Chancellery. We were expecting the Russians to enter Berlin, and I was afraid that the works of art would fall into the hands of the Russians. So I took them to the youth hostel on the Danube, which I knew from kayaking trips.
Da kannte ich mich etwas aus. Es war eine Jugendherberge und die haben es dann auch aufgenommen.
FRENTZ knew the youth hostel from his kayaking trips, but this time he arrived with a lorry packed full of the art treasures from conquered countries. He wanted these pictures to survive. FRENTZ photographed himself with a delayed timer, posing as their savior and as a sad Don Quixote. One of the paintings shows a Greek goddess being taken by Zeus in the form of a shower of gold. Another is Bruegel's blind people following their blind guide into an abyss.
After that, I did only one more film scene. In Berlin, with Adolf and the Hitler Youth. Actually, I wasn't allowed to do any more filming as he was trembling so much. He had Parkinson's disease. I never noticed him trembling, but the adjutant's office knew and prohibited me from film. You were only allowed to take photographs of him where you couldn't see him shaking.
On the afternoon of March the 20th, 1945, Hitler reviewed his last guard in the garden of the Reich Chancellery. It was a handful of boy soldiers who had knocked out some Russian tanks. Axmann, leader of the Hitler Youth, presented them to Hitler with the words, "This is your youth." Hitler stroked their cheeks, bestowed iron crosses on them, and sent them back into the heroic battle for Berlin.
Ich wurde einfach nicht mehr verständigt, wenn irgendwas war, nicht?
They simply didn't inform me of anything anymore. As I belonged to the inner circle, I couldn't just pack my things and leave. Once I tried to talk to him, but he almost got angry with me. "My Führer," I said, "I haven't been allowed to make a film for weeks, months. Can I not report to the front?" He said, "I'll have to think about it."
Das muss ich mir noch überlegen.
And the secretary said, "You could have guessed that. You've been here throughout the whole war, and now that things are in a mess, you want to run away." They thought I wanted to run away, but I simply didn't see any point in sitting around while I wasn't allowed to do anything.
Für mich war da kein Sinn mehr darin, dass ich da nur rumsitze und nichts tun darf.
On April the 20th, the front had reached the outskirts of Berlin, and FRENTZ celebrated Hitler's 56th birthday together with the inner circle of the servants. When the air raid sirens went off, the party moved to the Führer's bomb shelter, and Hitler's secretary Daranowski laughed at the bad jokes. FRENTZ left the party to show Hitler one more picture. After he had seen the picture, he talked of suicide.
Aber es war natürlich auch für meine Meinung das Beste, denn wenn die
That
Russen
was the best thing he could have done, because if the Russians had caught him alive, terrible things would have happened.
Mussolini wurde ja
I
am
showed
Ende
him the picture of
von
Mussolini's
den
death,
Gegnern
where they had strung him
an einer
up by the
Tankstelle
feet at a
mit den
petrol
Füßen nach oben
station.
aufgehängt.
On seeing this picture,
Das Bild hatte
Hitler
Hitler
himself wanted to die.
Dadurch wollte er selbst aus dem Leben scheiden, weil er so einen Tod nicht erwarten wollte.
Shortly before committing suicide, Hitler looked at the model of Linz, his Austrian hometown. He had planned to make Linz a metropolis and to spend his retirement there. My favorite playground was here, he said to Hermann Giesler, his architect. FRENTZ was doubtful whether he'd ever get the chance to have this film developed. Suddenly, he was ordered to fly out of Berlin with his pictures. In the corridor, he met Eva Braun.
Da habe ich dann Eva Braun
I went to Eva Braun, saying that I had orders to fly to Munich, and I asked her if I could put my negatives in their bomb shelter. She said yes. Just let the caretaker at Obersalzberg know.
Hausmeisterin vom Obersalzberg Bescheid. Und dadurch hatte ich ja
When
bei meiner
Bormann had me
Verhaftung
arrested
hatte Eva
there,
Bormann
those negatives proved that I hadn't intended to desert and give the negatives to the
die
Americans.
sie vermutet haben.
FRENTZ flew to the Obersalzberg and was arrested there by the SS on May the 5th, 1945. Before his arrest, he had finished his last roll of film. The last command from Berlin, given by the SS to Bormann, FRENTZ should be executed if he refused to hand over all his negatives. Then, suddenly, American liberators began bombing the Obersalzberg. FRENTZ was able to flee in the confusion. The SS caught him again. One of the SS officers said, "The negatives of the secret weapons and of Eva Braun will be enough." FRENTZ sorted out the negatives, handed them over, and survived.
C'est la vie.
The eye of Walter FRENTZ, framed by the past, survives.
So oder so ist es.
Life is so, sometimes it's so good. Come what come may, until the final day, at low tide, at high tide, you must
Du
decide.
musst entscheiden.
This Thursday, Hitler is one of the men in crisis when we hear of his troubled times with Paul von Hindenburg, who defeated the Führer in the race for the presidency. That's on Thursday at 4:30.